final episode in my Women in Ministry series. I'm Thaden Connor, and this is Theology with Thaden. So today we're going to just go over some of the material we've covered in this series, just do a brief overview of that. And then I'm going to come to a conclusion about what I personally believe about women in ministry and whether or not it's acceptable for women to serve in ministry. And I'm also going to provide some implications for how we should act based on that conclusion. So first of all, what does the Bible say about women in ministry? We looked at the two main passages on this topic, 1 Corinthians chapter 14 and 1 Timothy chapter 2. In 1 Corinthians chapter 14, we saw that passage was dealing with order in the church. It was not commanding all women to always be quiet in the church. Instead, it was simply ordering church members, and specifically the women, to behave in an orderly, respectful manner during church service. So there was nothing in 1 Corinthians chapter 14 about whether or not women should serve in ministry. Then we looked at 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 11 through 12, which is probably the most critical passage regarding women in ministry. And we saw that what Paul was probably doing in that passage was providing a specific commandment only to the Ephesian church that prevented women from serving in ministry. I do not think that commandment extends to churches today. Paul was speaking into a specific situation into the Ephesian church, brought on by false teaching and unhealthy cultural patterns in the city of Ephesus. And Paul thought that because of those cultural patterns and the false teaching that was rampant in the Ephesian church, that it would be better if women did not teach or serve in ministry in that church, to just keep the gospel pure and avoid corrupting the teaching of the gospel with false teaching. However, that commandment does not apply today. And we know that because we looked at Romans 16 and we saw that Paul actually noted women who served in ministry in places other than Ephesus. We saw how Phoebe was a prominent deacon in the early church, so much so that Paul entrusted her with delivering the letter to the Romans. And we also saw how Junia was a prominent apostle in the early church, which was a very important role indeed. And it involved a specific call to serve in ministry from the risen Lord Jesus Christ. And so from that, we can conclude that women in the early church during the time of the New Testament's writing did serve in positions of ministry. Finally, we looked at the tradition of the early church, and we again saw that women did serve in positions of ministry, definitely as deaconesses, and we saw that a lot of widows often served as deaconesses. And we also noted that women probably did serve as priests sometimes too. The literature and artwork that we have from that time period seems to suggest that. And so finally, what is my belief on women in ministry? Well, I believe that it's perfectly acceptable for women to serve in pretty much any ministry position in the church, because we don't see it forbidden anywhere in the Bible, in my opinion. And we also see a pattern of women serving in prominent positions in the church in the letters of Paul, as well as in the early church from the traditions we have from that time. So I think that women should be allowed to serve in basically any position in ministry they want. And there's maybe one exception to that, which would be serving in men's ministry. It just wouldn't make sense for a woman to serve as a leader in a ministry directed specifically to men, I think. And I think you could also conversely apply that to men. It wouldn't make sense for a man to be a leader in a woman's field of ministry. But other than those two specific exceptions, I don't think that women should be forbidden from serving in ministry in any position or capacity, because the Bible doesn't forbid them from doing so. And in fact, we see a model in which women such as Phoebe and Junia did serve in very important ministry roles in the early church. So what should we do with this knowledge then, if women are indeed absolutely permitted to serve in positions of leadership? Well, I think we should show respect to our women who are serving as pastors or leaders or deacons or elders or whatever role they might serve in churches. We should treat them with respect and as legitimate ministers and preachers of the gospel. Now, some of you probably still disagree with me and would argue that women still should not serve in positions of leadership. And I do understand why you believe that. I don't think it's a completely unreasonable opinion or anything, but I still think it's important to treat women in ministry with respect and love, even if you don't agree with that they should be in the positions they're serving in. I am personally a Christian college student, and I have heard stories and observed some instances where men in a ministry major treated women with a ministry major kind of disrespectfully and like they shouldn't be allowed to serve in ministry, and that's just not an appropriate way, not a Christ-like way to treat people. No matter how strongly you believe that the positions of ministry in the church are only for men, you should still treat women who are going into ministry with respect because their view is just as legitimate as yours. And even if you disagree with that view and think it's wrong, that doesn't mean that it's an illegitimate view. And you should still treat people with that opposing view and who are acting based on that opposing and scripturally sound view with respect. I hope this video series on women in ministry has been instructive. Please leave a comment in this or one of my other videos if you have any questions or if you'd like me to cover another theological topic in my next series of videos if I decide to do another series. Thank you so much. This has been fun. Have a blessed day.